patterns, distribution of plants and animals throughout the world is uneven. This distribution varies according to the latitudes, that is, the horizontal imaginary lines on the surface of the earth. So let us look at this figure. So the longest latitude is the equator, which is 0 degrees. Then up to 23.5 north and south of equator, the region is known as tropical region. Further between 23.5 to 66.5 north and south of equator, the region is temperate zone. And beyond 66.5 to 90 degrees is the polar zone. Now, as one moves away from the equator, the temperature goes on decreasing, and the species diversity also goes on decreasing. That means greater biodiversity is found at the tropics compared to temperate zone and polar zone. Now, Colombia, which is near equator, has about 1,400 species of birds. Then New York, which is at 41 degrees north, has 105 species, while Greenland at 71 degree north has 56 species. So you can clearly see from this example that as one moves away from the equator, that is at higher latitudes, there is decrease in the diversity of species. India lies in tropical and subtropical region. Here about 1200 species are found. This is in terms of birds. The tropical forests like Ecuador, they have 10 times the species that are present in a temperate region like Midwest of USA. If we compare the area, similar area of a tropical forest hosts a number of species, different species, compared to the same area in the temperate region. Greatest biodiversity is found in the tropical Amazon forest, which is in South America. roughly 40,000 species of plants, 3,000 species of fish, 1,300 species of birds, 427 species of mammals, then 378 species of reptiles, and 1,25,000 species of invertebrates. Now, one must be wondering why there is a greater biodiversity at tropics than temperate region. The temperate region was subjected to frequent glaciation in the past. So there was no time for the species to evolve. The tropical latitudes were undisturbed for millions of years, and that is why the tropical species had more time to evolve. Then, tropical environments are seasonal, isn't it? We have roughly three seasons, three major seasons. So, tropical environments are seasonal, they are relatively more constant and predictable compared to temperate region. So this promotes the niche specialization and leads to greater species diversity. Since the tropics receive direct sunlight, there is more productivity, then more food for the organisms, and therefore greater diversity. Different types of plants and animals are found. Then second pattern is species area relationships. Species area relationship describes the relationship between area of a habitat and number of species found. It says that larger areas contain large number of species. Species area relationship graph is constructed for single group of organisms such as vascular plants, mammals. So if you see this diagram, the graph shows relationship between species richness and area for a variety of taxa like birds, bats. Now this graph is a rectangular hyperbola. You can see this blue line is somewhat a rectangular hyperbola. On a logarithmic scale, it is a straight line. On y-axis, species richness, and on x-axis, area is taken. Then on logarithmic scale, it appears a straight line. The relationship between species richness and area is given by the equation log of S is equal to log of C plus Z log of A. Here, S is species richness, A is area, Z is the slope of the line, and C is the y-intercept. You can see here. Okay. Log of S is equal to log of C plus Z log of A. The value of Z lies in the range of 0.1 to 0.2 for the species present in two regions. But for very large areas, like the continents, the value of Z is 0.6 to 1.2. Just note down the correction, it is 1.2. 0.6 to 1.2. So let us now revise what are different biodiversity patterns. First is the latitudinal gradient. Latitudinal gradient means the distribution of species or the diversity of species goes on decreasing as one moves away from the equator. So equator, which is the 0 degree latitude, has more diverse species. Then next region is tropics, then temperate, and then polar zone. So why this biodiversity at the tropics is more than that of the temperate zone? Because temperate latitudes were subjected to glaciation in the past. So the species over there didn't have sufficient time to evolve. Whereas the tropics, they were undisturbed for millions of years. Species had time to develop or evolve. And second is that tropical environment is seasonal. It is relatively constant and predictable compared to the temperate environment. And since this region receives direct sunlight, there is more productivity, more number of producers, then more number of food is more larger availability of food is there, and that is why greater diversity of animals is present. So we have taken example of Colombia, which is near the equator. It has about 1,400 species of birds. Then at New York, that is 41 degree north latitude, 105 species of birds are found, roughly. These are rough numbers. And while at Greenland, at 71 degrees north, around 56 species of birds are found. So you can easily see from this example that at higher altitudes, less number of species are present of a particular group. Then we have discussed about the Amazon forest. It is the most diverse or the greatest biodiversity area on the earth. It is present in South America. Then we have discussed species area relationship. What does species area relationship say? That larger the area, it will contain large number of species. So a graph describes a relationship between area of a habitat and number of species found. So if species richness is plotted on the x-axis and area on the species richness is plotted on y-axis and area on the x-axis, you can get a graph as a rectangular hyperbola. In logarithmic scale, it is a straight line. So the equation is given as log of s is equal to log of c plus z log of a. S is species richness, A is area, Z is slope of the line, C is the y-intercept. The value of Z is usually 0.1 to 0.2, but for larger areas, it is 0.6 to 1.2. Then this is constructed for a single group of animals, that is vascular plants, birds, and mammals. Then let us come to the last topic of this lecture, which is global biodiversity hotspots. Biodiversity hotspots are defined as the regions with exceptional concentrations of endemic species that are undergoing exceptional loss of habitat. That means exceptional concentrations. That means extremely high concentrations of endemic species. We have discussed what are endemic species. Those that are found only in a particular region or confined to a particular region. So high concentrations of endemic species. And also they are undergoing exceptional loss, means again at a very fast pace there is loss of the habitat of such species. This concept was developed by Norman Myers in the year 1988. Today, there are 34 areas around the world which are qualified as biodiversity hotspots. These cover about 2.3% of the land on the earth. But there are certain criteria for a particular region to qualify as a biodiversity hotspot. The first criteria is the area must have at least 1500 vascular plants as endemics. That means they should be irreplaceable. About 1500 vascular plants should be endemics. Then it must have 30% or less of its natural vegetation. That means the species should be threatened. These are the two characters of an area or criteria for an area to be qualified as a biodiversity hotspot. Yes, this is a map showing global biodiversity hotspots. So there are 34 in total. So you can see this is the Africa. Okay, this region is Africa. So there is Eastern Africa. It is known as Eastern Afro Montana. See here, this is Eastern Afro Montana. Then the Guinean forest of Western Africa. This this part. Guinean forest of Western Africa. Then Horn of Africa. See here, this region. So it's known as Horn of Africa. Then Madagascar and the Indian Ocean Islands. From the east side, you can see here. Then Maputaland and Pondoland Albany. This is in the south. This is another biodiversity hotspot. Then Succulent Faro. You can see here this region. Then Cape Floristic region over here. So these are the biodiversity hotspots of Africa. Then the Asia and Australia, this region, the Himalayas, in India, the Eastern Himalayas, then Japan over here. Okay, this is Asia and Australia, Japan here. Then mountains of southwest China over here. New Caledonia, then New Zealand, Philippines, Western Sundaland, you can see here this, Wallachia over here, Wallachia, sorry. Then Polynesia, Micronesia, over here you can see, and Southwest Australia. Then North and Central America. North and Central America, California Floristic Province. Over here it is in the North America. Caribbean Islands. Madrian Pine Oak Islands. The Mesoamerican Forest. Then in South America, Cerrado, on the eastern part of South America. Then Chilean winter rainfall, Valdivian forest on the west side. Then Tumbes Choco Magdalena on the west side, northwestern side. Tropical Andes on the west. Then parts of Atlantic forest. Then let us see the biodiversity hotspots in Europe. Caucasus, this region. Then Iran, Anatolian region over here. The Mediterranean basin. This one over here. Then the mountains of Central Asia. here. So these are roughly the biodiversity hotspots. Total 34 of them are present. So you have to remember which biodiversity hotspot is present in which continent. Yes, now the threats to biodiversity or the biodiversity hotspots. First is habitat loss. In the previous lecture, we have seen how habitat loss occurs. There are two ways. One is by natural phenomena, and second is by human activities. So, in both the cases, there is loss of native habitat of organisms. Then overhunting. This is another overhunting and harvesting of wild species. So that is another reason why there is depletion of the area in these regions. Yes, pollution. The development is always associated with certain negative impacts, and pollution is one of them. Then introduction of invasive species. Invasive species are those which are from another area. So they compete with the native species for food, then light, and because of which the native species are destroyed. Then climate change. We have discussed what is climate change. It is occurring because of global warming. So all of these are the threats to these biodiversity hotspot regions. Now, how can one conserve biodiversity? There are two ways in which biodiversity can be conserved. First is in situ conservation. In situ conservation is conservation in the natural habitats of the species. That means for that, national parks, biosphere reserves, and wildlife sanctuaries. Okay, all of these are protected areas notified by the governments. So these are established for conservation of different species in their natural habitat. Then ex situ conservation. Ex situ conservation means conservation of species in areas outside their natural habitats. So conservation which take place in zoos, aquariums, gene banks, botanical gardens. All of this is example of ex situ conservation. The species are kept in captivity. So there are efforts are made to increase the breeding, and then they are released into the natural ecosystem. So this is one of the way to conserve biodiversity. Now, several organizations across the world are involved in conservation of these biodiversity hotspots. So the first is Conservation International, then the Worldwide Fund for Nature, then Alliance for Zero Extinction, and Critical Ecosystem. So these are the important organizations which are involved in conservation of biodiversity hotspots. So let us now revise this topic. A biodiversity hotspot is a region with exceptional concentrations of endemic species and that are going exceptional loss of habitat. This concept was developed by Norman Myers in 1988. At present, there are 34 areas um, on the earth which are considered to be the biodiversity hotspots, and these cover about 2.3% of the land area. Now, there are certain criteria for any area to be qualified as a biodiversity hotspot. First is that an area must have at least 1,500 vascular plants as endemics. And second is that 30% or less of its natural vegetation should be present in the area. Then these were the global biodiversity hotspots. We have seen the different biodiversity hotspots in Africa, then Asia, Australia, Europe, North America, and South America. Then we have seen what are the threats to these biodiversity hotspots. First is habitat loss, which occurs due to natural phenomenon or the human activities. Then overhunting and harvesting, pollution, introduction of invasive species, climate change. Then we have seen how biodiversity is conserved in these areas, that there are two ways, in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. In situ conservation means conservation of species in their natural habitat. So the conservation which occurs in national parks, biosphere reserves, and wildlife sanctuary is in situ conservation. Then we have discussed ex situ conservation, which is in areas outside the natural habitats of organisms. So the conservation which occurs in zoos, aquariums, gene banks, botanical gardens, all of it is a form of ex situ conservation of species. Then at the global level, several organizations are involved in the conservation of global biodiversity hotspots. First is Conservation International, Worldwide Fund for Nature, Alliance for Zero Extinction, critical ecosystems are amongst the important ones. So far in this lesson, biodiversity and conservation, we have seen the definition of biodiversity, that it is the variety and variability of species of all living organisms in a given region. Then this term was coined by Walter G. Rawson in 1985. So it is variety and variability of species. So variety and variability of species of all living organisms. Living organisms will include plants, animals, and microorganisms. Then we have seen the organizations, that is IUCN and UNEP. In 1992, they have defined biodiversity as totality of genes, species, and ecosystems in a region. Then we have seen the levels of biodiversity. There are three levels of biodiversity. First is genetic diversity. It is variety of genes present within a particular species. So we have seen that a species which has several population will have different genetic composition. That is, individuals will have different genetic composition, and this variation of genes will also be present in a single population. Okay. Then species diversity, variety of species present in a particular habitat or ecosystem. Coral reefs are known to be the most diverse habitats in terms of species composition. Then we have seen the ecosystem diversity, variety of ecosystems present in a given region. We have discussed about the oriental region. Okay, so the grasslands, forests, desert ecosystems, these are all the diverse ecosystems present in oriental region. Then we have seen biogeography, its definition, and different biogeographic zones of India. So the definition of biogeography is the study of spatial and temporal distribution of species of plants and animals, along with the factors responsible for their distribution. Spatial and temporal distribution means how the species are distributed in space and time. What are the factors affecting this distribution? First factor is soil, then altitude, rainfall, and light conditions. Then we have discussed geological timescale, that the older layers of the rock will have different species, okay, compared to the new or the upper layers. So based on the study of the rock layers and the fossils that are found, the events in the Earth's history are classified. Yes, then different biogeographic zones of India. The first was Trans-Himalayan Zone. Trans-Himalayan Zone, it is a high altitude region. It includes the Ladakh and Lahore Spiti area of Himachal Pradesh. Very high endemism is found in this area. Then we have discussed the animals of this region. So the Tibetan ass, black neck crane, snow leopard, wild yak. You have to remember these animals. And the vegetation is sparse alpine steppe. Then the Himalayan zone. Himalayan zone, again, it is categorized into Western Himalayas and Eastern Himalayas. So Western Himalayas, the region consists of Kashmir and Kumaon in Uttarakhand. Then based on height, it is divided into submontane, temperate montane, and alpine zone. So each of these, they have different plant and animal species. So you should remember the animal, blue sheep. Okay. Then the Angul or the Kashmir stag. Then the Eastern Himalayas. Eastern Himalayas, it includes regions of Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh. Again, this is also classified into different zones based on the height. And you have to remember the animal like red panda, siro, then the rhododendrons. We have discussed about these species. Then the next zone was Gangetic Plain. Gangetic Plain, it stretches from River Yamuna to the coastal plains of Orissa. It is a highly fertile region since it is formed by the alluvial deposits brought by rivers like Ganga, Yamuna, and their tributaries. You have to remember the animals like Nilgai and the black buck. And you have to remember one tree which is found in this region is Mahua plant. Then Indian desert. The western part of the country shows Indian desert. It has Indian desert. It includes the states of Rajasthan, Gujarat. Here, there is xerophytic vegetation. That means vegetation, the plant and animal species, they are adapted to live in the desert. You should remember here the plants, that is the Ziziphus and the acacia. Then we have discussed about the desert animals. Okay. The Sara hardwicki and Great Indian bustard, particularly these two animals. Then the semi-arid zone. Semi-arid zone, it surrounds the desert zone. You can see here. Okay, it surrounds the desert zone. You have to remember one animal here, which is Asiatic lion, found in the Gir National Park. Then Bhok tree, which is found in the Aravalli Mountains. Then Deccan Peninsula. Deccan Peninsula, the largest of the biogeographic zone, and you should remember this animal, Gharial, a fish-eating crocodile. Then Western Ghats. Western Ghats, it spreads across the 6 states. And moist evergreen forests, so trees like jamun. This is the animal diversity. You can see the lion-tailed macaque and the hornbill. But remember these two animals. Then Indian grizzly squirrel. Then the Northeast India. It is a biodiversity hotspot. Vegetation is varied in this region. One will get evergreen trees, semi-evergreen, deciduous forests, grasslands also. And you have to remember the two birds, hornbill, rufous-necked hornbill, then a moor falcon, which is a migratory bird, and greater one-horn rhinoceros. Then we have discussed the islands. Islands are the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and Lakshadweep. You have to remember the Nicobar macaque in the Nicobar Islands. Then there are species of marine turtles. Four species are there. This region is high in endemism since it is a biodiversity hotspot, Nicobar Islands. Then the vegetation is again varied. There are mangroves, there are evergreen forest, semi-evergreen, and deciduous forest. Then coasts. Coasts, they will have different communities. There will be mangroves, there will be sandy beaches, mudflats, coral and rocky coastline. Then there are marine angiosperm, pastures. You have to remember this animal, dugong, or the sea cow. It is a herbivore, feeds on sea grasses. Yes, then we have discussed what are the endangered species of India. So yesterday we have defined what is an endangered species. The species that will become extinct in near future is known as an endemic species. So efforts for conservation of these species is coordinated by IUCN. Why does a species become extinct? We have discussed this also, that there is habitat loss due to natural phenomenon, where we have discussed the example of dinosaurs, then human activities like deforestation, hunting. It is responsible for extinction of species. The lack of genetic variation, which is mainly due to inbreeding. We have also discussed this yesterday. The endangered animals of India. Asiatic lion, confined to Gir National Park, very few individuals are left. Then in the greater one-horned rhinoceros, or the Indian rhino, found in Assam. The major threat to this is it is believed that its horn is valued or it has value in medicine. Then red panda, you get this in northern Bengal, okay, Singalila and Neora Valley National Park. Then Ganges River dolphin, which prefers to live in deep waters, and it is an indicator of the health of river ecosystem. The main threat to this is building of dams on the rivers. Then Asiatic lion. Asiatic lion main threat is habitat fragmentation and inbreeding, genetic inbreeding. Then we have discussed red sandalwood, okay, the endangered plant species. Then the endemic species of India. Endemic species are defined as those which are confined to a particular region. This concept was introduced by A.D. Campbell in And then we have discussed what are relic endemics, micro-endemics, and neo-endemics. Then why endemism is observed? Because there are geographical barriers like mountains and seas which prevent the dispersal of species. Then many islands are isolated from mainland for several years, because of which endemism is observed. And these islands are undisturbed. Then we have discussed the endemic animals, Indian giant squirrel, Ratufa indica, beautiful squirrel, red color, and then lion-tailed macaque, then the Narcodon hornbill. These are some of the endemic animals. Endemic plants, the Drosera indica and Shivsuman. These are two endemic plants. There are many. The list is long, but we have just taken few examples. Then India has a mega biodiverse region. What is a mega biodiverse country that we have discussed? That 70% of world's biodiversity is found in these countries. The region has high endemic flora and fauna. Then today we have discussed biodiversity patterns. So we have discussed latitudinal grading, that as one moves away from equator towards the pole, the biodiversity goes on decreasing. So the equatorial regions, they will have greater number of species diversity compared to the temperate and polar regions. Then we have taken the example of Colombia, which is found near the equator. It has about 1,400 species of birds. And then New York, which is at 41 degrees north, has 105 species of birds, while the Greenland, which is at 71 degrees north, has 56 species of birds. Tropical forests, that is tropical Amazon forest, are the most or the greatest biodiversity regions present in the earth, is present on the earth. Now, why there is a greater biodiversity at tropics than temperate region? The temperate latitudes, they were subjected to glaciation in the past, and so there was no time for the species to evolve. And in the tropical latitudes, they were undisturbed for many years, and because of which the species on these latitudes, they have undergone evolution. The tropical latitudes. Then the tropical environment is seasonal. It is relatively constant and predictable compared to temperate environment. And also the sun rays reach directly in this region, so more productivity, more food, therefore more diversified animals. Then we have discussed the species area relationships, that larger the area, larger will be the biodiversity present. So a graph of species richness is plotted against area. It is a rectangular hyperbola, and on the logarithmic scale it is a straight line. It is usually constructed for a single group of plant or animal. And it is given by the equation log of s is equal to log of C plus Z log of A. S here is species richness, A is area, Z is slope of the line, C is the y-intercept. The value of Z is 0.1 to 0.2. For very large continents, it is 0.6 to 1.2. Then we have discussed what are global biodiversity hotspots. But these are the regions with exceptional concentrations of endemic species that are undergoing exceptional loss of habitat. And this concept was developed by Norman Myers in 1988. How many biodiversity hotspots are there around the world? There are 34 areas, and these cover 2.3% of the land. There are certain criteria for any land, area to be qualified as a biodiversity hotspot, that at least 15,000 vascular plants should be endemic to that area, and 30% or less of its natural vegetation should be lost or it is threatened. It should have 30% or less of its natural vegetation. Then we have discussed the biodiversity hotspots of the world. We have discussed the Africa, then Asia, Europe, Australia, North America, and South America. In India also there are biodiversity hotspots. The Western Ghats, the Himalayas, these are the biodiversity hotspots present in India. Then we have discussed what are the threats to these areas. That there is habitat loss due to natural phenomenon and human activities. Then due to overhunting and harvesting. Then pollution. Introduction of invasive species. Invasive species are those which are from foreign land and they compete with the native species. Then climate change. Then conservation of biodiversity. That means there is in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. In situ conservation means conservation in the natural habitats. Ex situ conservation means conservation outside the natural habitats. Then we have seen the conservation organizations which work to preserve or protect the biodiversity in these areas. So four of them are important: Conservation International, Worldwide Fund for Nature, Alliance for Zero Extinction, and Critical Ecosystems.